You're with ABC News. It's 9 a.m. Eastern. We are live to Melbourne this hour, where convicted triple murderer Erin Patterson will be sentenced for killing 3 relatives with poisonous death cap mushrooms. Now, in a Victorian first, the judge's decision will be broadcast live, and we will bring you that as soon as it starts in about half an hour. We're also going to have live reaction from outside court and comprehensive coverage throughout the day. In a moment, I will be joined by former Supreme Court Judge Anthony Wheeling, who will talk us through the sentencing process. It is Monday, the 8th of September. I'm Gemma Vaness, and this is ABC News Mornings. Convicted triple murderer Erin Patterson will soon be sentenced by a judge in the Victorian Supreme Court, marking the conclusion of the mushroom murder case that has gripped the world. In July, a jury found her guilty of the murders of 3 of her lunch guests and the attempted murder of a 4th, after she served them a meal containing death cap mushrooms at her home in Leongatha in Victoria's South Gippsland region. That was on July 29, 2023. The victims were all directly related to Patterson's estranged husband, Simon Patterson. His parents, Gail and Don, both died, along with Gail's sister, Heather Wilkinson. Heather's husband, Ian Wilkinson, survived after weeks of treatment in hospital. Erin Patterson pleaded not guilty and always maintained the deadly lunch was a tragic accident. More than 50 witnesses gave evidence during the marathon 2-month trial at the Latrobe Valley Law Courts in Morwell. The jury was shown video of Patterson visiting hospital after the lunch. Doctors told the court she showed no signs of death cap mushroom poisoning. Jurors were also shown security vision of her dumping a food dehydrator at a local transfer station and photos of the individual beef Wellington servings. The prosecution presented messages it said demonstrated the deterioration in the relationship between Patterson and her in-laws. After 6.5 days of deliberations, the jury found Patterson guilty on all 4 charges. Last month, police released Patterson's police interview, recorded a week after the deadly lunch.
Obviously, we've got concerns in relation to these mushrooms and where they've come from. Okay. Is that something you've done in the past, foraging for mushrooms or anything like that? Never?
Never.
Right. Do you preserve foods or anything like that?
No.
Have you ever dehydrated food or anything like that? Okay.
Patterson most recently appeared in the Supreme Court, this time in Melbourne, where the 50-year-old heard from the people affected by her offending through victim impact statements. Ian Wilkinson spoke of his enduring grief of losing his wife of 44 years, while a statement from Simon Patterson was read to the court, revealing the devastating impact on the couple's 2 children. Justice Christopher Beale will sentence Erin Patterson shortly, and for the first time in Victoria, it'll be live streamed and televised. Justice Beale says he made the decision to increase understanding of the workings of the court. Well, our reporter Alexandra Alvaro has covered the case extensively. She joins us now from outside the Victoria Supreme Court. Alex, let's go to that decision to broadcast this live. It's a first for the Victorian Supreme Court. Tell us more about why the decision has been made.
Well, firstly, Gemma, I just wanted to let you know that the prison van has just arrived. We've seen the prison van arrive. There are PSOs outside the court, and we believe that Erin Patterson is likely in that prison van. So she has arrived at court for her sentencing. But to your question, yes, this is the first time that the Supreme Court has decided to let a television camera inside the court. It's highly unusual. Usually in court, only journalists are allowed to use their phones. They're not allowed to film, definitely not allowed to record anything. So having a camera in court full stop is unusual, but having a television camera in court is even more unusual. And as you say, the reason for that is Justice Beale wanted to be able to get this information out to the public promptly and completely, given the public interest in this case. Now, the feed will just be of Justice Beale. We won't be able to see the full courtroom. We won't be able to see Erin Patterson on this feed. Only the journalists and members of the public and the legal team will be able to get the full picture of what is happening in court, but we will nonetheless be able to see Justice Beale delivering his sentence, and we know that it's set to go for about 45 minutes, we've heard. That's an estimation, but we have discussed as journos that during this trial nothing has really run on time. The trial was meant to go for 5 to 6 weeks and it ended up blowing out to about 11 weeks, so we can't be sure that it will take exactly 45 minutes, but that's the estimation that we've been given, and we'll bring that live to you as it comes through.
And Alex, as you say, it looks as though Erin Patterson has arrived. What do we know of her movements today?
So Erin Patterson is currently in custody. She's being housed at the Dame Phyllis Frost maximum security prison in Deer Park. Sorry, it is a bit loud out here. Let me know if you can't hear me. But so she's in custody at the moment. As I say, she's just arrived in a prison van. When she walks into the courtroom, she'll likely be flanked by prison officers. And she'll take a seat in the courtroom, and that's where she'll listen to her sentence. Once it's over, she'll again be taken out of the courtroom, loaded back into the van and head back to Deer Park to Dame Phyllis Frost.
We've just seen Erin Patterson go in, and Alex, we can hear you just fine there. The courtroom, I mean, it will be full. Of course, family members, friends, the media, onlookers. There's a lot of interest in this.
Yes, so I'm standing on Lonsdale Street for those of you who know Melbourne, but on William Street around the corner there is just a massive line of journalists and members of the public who are waiting to get into that courtroom. There will be limited seats available. I'm sure there will be people who miss out on actually getting to be in that courtroom today. My colleague Steph Ferrier earlier spoke to members of the public who had been waiting. As you might know, during the trial there were court watchers who rocked up to court every day in the Latrobe Valley law courts just to watch the trial, to listen to the evidence. So there's been huge public interest in this case, as you know, and that won't be stopping today.
And that public interest has even been intense outside of Australia. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so, I mean, obviously there have been local Melbourne journalists covering the case, the usual court journalists that you see here at the Supreme Court, but there have been national media and then, of course, international media, so, podcasts, documentaries even, books are being written about this trial as we speak, so no shortage of attention there. The BBC was covering this trial, our colleagues at the BBC, and then also the Daily Mail had journalists covering the entire trial. So, a huge media contingent. I've spoken to colleagues who say this is probably the biggest trial they've ever covered in terms of just the sheer amount of coverage and the sheer amount of journalists who have come along to watch this trial. And that's just due to the insatiable public interest in this case. And, I've thought about this. I'm not really sure what it is that attracts people to this case. It could be a number of reasons. Is it the fact that Erin Patterson is a woman and she's committed these crimes? Is it the mundanity of these crimes taking place at a lunch, at a family lunch in such a small Australian town? Is the murder weapon the fact that mushrooms were used and concealed in this meal to kill her victims? There are many different reasons, I think, why people have been fascinated by this case, but I think in that, it's important to acknowledge that today there are victims, and when I say victims, of course the people who have died, Ian Wilkinson, but also the family members who are really impacted by this trial. This crime has had ripple effects in the small community of Korumburra.
Yeah, I wanted to speak about that. I mean, the families affected and those small communities, because I guess today is about the sentencing, of course, and that will provide some closure to those who have been interested in this case. Perhaps not so for the families and those communities that are still grieving.
Yeah, and last time we were in court, this was during a plea hearing not too long ago, a couple of weeks ago, we heard from some of those family members, we heard victim impact statements from them, and this is the opportunity for family members really to address the accused and tell the court about the impacts that the crimes have had on them. So we heard from Ian Wilkinson, the sole surviving guest of the lunch, and one of the things he said is it's one of the distressing shortcomings of our society that so much attention is showered on those who do evil and so little on those who do good. So I guess there he's talking about the extreme attention that we've seen on Erin Patterson as the offender, but the proportionally little attention that we've seen on her victims. And by all accounts, these people, Don and Gail Patterson, Ian and Heather Wilkinson, are incredibly decent people. They were incredibly decent people who will be very missed. Ian Wilkinson is the pastor at the Corumburra Baptist Church. He is very well known, and by extension Heather too. Very charitable people, very generous people. Don and Gail, very religious people. These people had grandchildren, and in some cases their parents have actually outlived them. Gail and Heather's father outlived them, and Don's mother outlived him. So these are elderly parents of elderly people who have outlived their children, which is just incredibly sad.
Our reporter Alexandra Alvaro, who is outside the Victorian Supreme Court there. Thank you, and we will return to Alex throughout the morning. Now, Anthony Wheely KC is a former New South Wales Supreme Court judge and chair of the Centre for Public Integrity, and he joins us now. Anthony Wheely, thank you for your time. Firstly, can I get your thoughts, on this momentous decision to broadcast this sentencing live from the court and the reason that that decision has been taken?
Well, I think that the whole idea of opening up the courts by way of live view is a very healthy sign. There's too much mystique around the courts. People don't know what happens there. We find that the shock jocks and some of the commentators make a lot of fuss about sentences being too light. This gives everyone the opportunity to understand how a sentence is formulated and what principles underline it. So it's a very good thing, I think.
Yeah, a lot of transparency in that. The sentencing process, I've heard it described as being mechanical in part, but then ultimately, of course, a judgment call. How would you describe it?
Well, I think it varies from case to case. Sentencing in general terms is very complex and very difficult. But this case is not as difficult as many others because it's generally agreed that the crime committed here was of a very serious kind. The court's task is to weigh up the objective seriousness of the offence and then to determine whether there are any mitigating factors that might ameliorate a stern sentence. And here, there's agreement between the Crown and the defence that probably a life sentence is warranted. The only issue is should there be a parole period, a non-parole period allowed or not. So in that sense, it's easier than some sentencing tasks. I'd also add that there are very few mitigating factors here. This woman, of course, has not committed any serious crime before. That's a mitigating factor. She does have family, but that probably would play very little part in the sentencing. She will be harshly imprisoned, probably in solitary confinement. She'll be at risk from other prisoners, but those are not uncommon features of our prison system, I regret to say. And, they're unlikely to play any great part in the sentencing. So one comes back to the objective seriousness of the offence itself, and there can be no doubt that this was a carefully planned and deliberate murder of 3 people and an attempted murder of another, which really falls into the most serious category of offence.
And Anthony Wheely, when we say a life sentence, what does that mean in Victoria?
Well, the court has the discretion to say that with a life sentence, there will nevertheless come a period of time when the offender may apply for parole to be released into the community. Or they may say that no such period should be allowed. So there's a discretion there. And although it sounds very harsh to say that someone should never be released from prison, where the seriousness of the offence falls into that category, then I think that the judge has that discretion if he thinks the case is appropriate for it.
We know court reporters, observers of the courts, they're always on the lookout for hints as to which way the judge will go, or to what extent, I should say. Either speaking generally or in this case, do you think you can get a sense of that?
Probably not. Judges are not very opaque when they start their sentencing remarks. He's probably spent quite a bit of time polishing up his decision, and I suspect that he won't give much away till towards the end. So you can have a bet on it if you like, but you can be assured that it will be a very stern sentence, come what may.
What would the appeals process look like should Erin Patterson's lawyers take that option?
Well, she maintains her innocence, so I would expect that she would appeal. And she can appeal against the conviction. She can argue that the jury's decision was unreasonable. She can argue that the judge made errors in the directions he gave to the jury, or maybe she can point to some other manifest inadequacy in the trial. As to the sentence itself, well, again, it's open slather, really, for her to argue that the sentence is too severe, just as the Crown can argue on an appeal that the sentence was too lenient. So I'm afraid we're going to have a lot more saga play out in this particular matter, even after sentence is passed.
And I know you've described this as a terribly sad and also very unusual case. As part of the sentencing, the judge will read out the elements of this case, won't he?
He will, yes. And I mean, they're well known, of course, to the public. And I think the fact that this was a domestic setting, a family gathering, a lovely meal cooked, so it seemed, the sort of thing that, binds families together, and yet underneath it all was a very terrible, carefully planned plot to kill these people in the most painful way. So that's why there's a fascination with the whole story, I think. It is so different and so unusual from the sort of average everyday crime that we read about in the papers.
And that is in part the reasoning behind today's decision to broadcast this live in a Victorian Supreme Court first. And I know we spoke to that a moment ago, but what do you hope is gained from that live broadcast today for those watching on?
Well, I hope that people will understand the process better. I think they'll see that sentencing is quite complicated and not something that can be done lightly or easily. And I think more importantly, it just enables the community, in a sense, to be part of the whole process, just as the jury who decided guilt or innocence were part of the process. So now the community can listen into this, and they are part of the process of seeing justice done, and justice done correctly. And I think that's very important.
And that process, we're told, will take around 45 minutes. Obviously, that's an estimate there. But just tell us what we can expect that to look like.
Well, I'm surprised that it's only going to take 45 minutes because, in Sydney, for example, we've had a couple of trials where I've seen a live broadcast and they've taken a couple of hours, 2 or 3 hours. So the fact that this is only 45 minutes means that we might be getting a kind of pared down version of the sentence. I expect that's probably right. He won't go through every single fact was at issue in the trial. He couldn't possibly do that in 45 minutes. So good on him, because I do think that the more quickly these things are done, the easier it is for the public to appreciate, and for the journalists who want to make notes and publish what's happened. It's a lot easier if the thing can be done relatively quickly.
Anthony Wheely, KC, a former New South Wales Supreme Court judge and chair of the Centre for Public Integrity. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
A pleasure.
And let's return to our reporter Alexandra Alvaro, who is outside the Supreme Court. Alex, let's go to the victims in this case. What did we learn about them during this trial?
Yeah, well, as you say, that Ian Wilkinson did just arrive at court about 15 minutes ago. He's the sole surviving guest of the lunch, Pastor Ian Wilkinson, and we did hear from him last time he was in court. He gave a victim impact statement. This is the opportunity for victims of crimes to essentially address the offender and the court and tell them what the impact of the crime was on them and their family. So we did hear from Ian Wilkinson. He spoke about his wife, Heather, the impact of losing her, the fact that he's now living a single life, really, and that her lack of company has taken the joy out of pottering around the garden, pottering around the house. And so he also spoke about the ongoing impacts on his health. He once again thanked the doctors who took care of him while he was in hospital. We know that he was in hospital for about 2 months after that mushroom lunch. He was in a coma for a lot of that time. He was very, very unwell. Doctors said that they thought he was going to die. So he spoke about the fact that his liver function hasn't really returned to normal and his energy levels aren't the same as they used to be. He also spoke about forgiveness, and we know that Pastor Ian Wilkinson is a deeply religious man, and he extended an olive branch to Erin Patterson, essentially. He said, I offer you forgiveness, I bear no ill will. I hope that she uses this time in jail to essentially become a better person. And one of the quotes was, now I am no longer Erin Patterson's victim. She has become the victim of my kindness. So a really powerful quote from Ian Wilkinson there. We also heard from the daughter of Pastor Ian Wilkinson and Heather Wilkinson, Ruth Dubois. She spoke about the resilience of her father, Ian Wilkinson, and that's something we've seen throughout the trial. He was there every day in court, listening to the evidence very stoically. He never really gave anything away on his face as he was listening to that evidence. But we heard from Ruth Dubois. She spoke about, Ian Wilkinson's strength, the fact that she misses her mother so much, and she spoke about Erin Patterson in the way that, you had many available opportunities not to carry out this crime, and yet you still did. And she said, I don't know how you would choose this for your children. Erin Patterson's children obviously now left without a mother. Their mother is in jail. And we also heard from Simon Patterson on that matter. He said, their family has been changed. Their children now live in a broken family with the knowledge that their mother killed their grandparents. And Simon Patterson also took aim at the media. He was frustrated by the invasion of privacy. He said he'd been chased, followed, stalked. One of the quotes was, I doubt I'll get used to being treated in such a dehumanising way by these creepy strangers who regard humans as merely content to further their media careers. So he was quite scathing in regard to the coverage of the trial, and Ruth Dubois also touched on that, the fact that in some cases their trauma has been used as entertainment. So that's what we heard really through the victim impact statements when we were in court last. And we also heard, interestingly, about Erin Patterson's custody arrangements, if you wanted to touch on that as well. She is kept in a cell basically for 22 to 24 hours a day. She's guarded quite closely, and that is due to her notoriety. And this is something that her defence team said Justice Beale should take into account when sentencing, that because of her notoriety, she has to be supervised. So she has more limited access to other things in prison, for example, the library and what have you. We also heard that she has access in her prison cell to a television. She's an avid crocheter, so in her cell she does have some items that she's crocheted. She has access to a hair straightener. So we heard really all kinds of things about her custody arrangements as well.
Yeah, so for those watching and those just joining us, convicted triple murderer Erin Patterson will soon be sentenced by a judge in the Victorian Supreme Court. This will mark the conclusion of the mushroom murder case that, as we know, has gripped the world, and that will be broadcast live. We will be broadcasting that here on the ABC in what is a first for the Victorian Supreme Court to allow everybody to see that process and give transparency to that. Alex, we spoke about this a little earlier, but tell us why that decision has been made in this case that has had so much interest from here in Australia, but of course overseas as well.
Yeah, so essentially, as you say, the court has opened this up to be televised live. It's a highly unusual decision. We don't see that very often. We know that in the case of George Pell at the county court, that was also broadcast live. But here at the Supreme Court, that's never happened, according to the media team at the Supreme Court. And the reason that that was done, Justice Beale said, was so that the reasons for the sentence could be delivered promptly and completely. And he's completely aware of, you know, the huge public interest in this case. So when we do see that broadcast beamed in, and we will bring it to you live, we'll see a shot of Justice Beale. We won't be able to see the rest of the courtroom. It will just be a shot of Justice Beale. Only the people in the courtroom will be able to see Erin Patterson, her reaction, which will be something that journalists will be watching very keenly. If you remember, during the verdict, Erin didn't really give much away. She was emotionless. She blinked rapidly. This is something that we saw from her during the trial, but other than that, we didn't really see her give much away. So I think journalists will be looking very keenly today for how Erin Patterson reacts to the sentence being handed down. So yeah, as I say, Justice Beale will deliver his sentence, and then Erin Patterson will be rounded back into the prison van. We saw it arrive not long ago, so she is in court. And she will be leaving in that prison van as well after the sentence is delivered, which is expected to take about 45 minutes.
And we're expecting it to begin in just minutes. As you say, Alex, we will be going to that as soon as it begins. Now, you spoke about Erin Patterson arriving there. Tell us about what you have seen outside court this morning and the atmosphere there.
Yeah, it's pretty busy outside court. Not so much behind me, that's where the prison van came in, but just around the corner on William Street, there was just a massive line snaking out of the door, filled with journalists, members of the public. Of course, there's a huge media contingent here today, a huge media contingent that has been following the trial in general. So a lot of journalists will be looking to see pretty much the final chapter in this case, apart from if an appeal is brought on by Erin Patterson and her team. So it's a huge day, and there are also members of the public looking to get in. As I was saying before, you know, there have been court watchers who have been very keenly watching this trial. During the trial, we would be up early in the morning. It's very cold in the Latrobe Valley at that time of year during that May-June period. But nonetheless, there were people lining up outside the courtroom at about 6 o'clock trying to get a spot in that courtroom in Court 4 in the Latrobe Valley Law Courts. So no shortage of public interest in this trial, and that continues today. We saw some of those court watchers who were coming to Morwell each day here at the Supreme Court today, those same court watchers.
We've seen there a replay of that vision of Erin Patterson arriving there. Now, Alex, today, of course, is the sentencing of Erin Patterson. It will be about her, but we can't forget that at the heart of this, the families and the small communities that have been so affected by this. And for many, today will be about closure, perhaps not so for them.
Yeah, I mean, it's also impossible to know how these families are feeling. I mean, we haven't heard much, you know, from the Patterson and Wilkinson families. They've been very private throughout this. So I can only imagine that this will be an emotional day for them. We did, as I say, see Ian Wilkinson come enter the court this morning, so he will be there. No word yet on whether Erin Patterson's estranged husband, Simon Patterson, will be in the courtroom or any of the other members of the Patterson and Wilkinson families. We just don't know yet. Hopefully we'll be able to bring you that information soon when we have some journos in the courtroom. They should be filing in about now. So, yeah.
Just to reiterate, Alex, the shot that we will get will be of Justice Beale delivering this sentence. We won't see Erin Patterson there. As we have seen, she has arrived this morning. What do we know of her movements today?
So she arrived in a prison van. She's come all the way from Deer Park. For those who know Melbourne, it's where Dame Phyllis Frost's centre is. It's a maximum security women's prison. That is where Erin Patterson is being housed, where she is in custody. She's come all the way to the Supreme Court. She's been dropped off in a prison van. It's quite a long vehicle with a number of windows across the top of it. So she's arrived in that vehicle with some PSOs guarding those doors. She's probably filing into the courtroom now, surrounded or flanked by a couple of PSOs who will sit with her during the sentence. And there she'll sit for about 45 minutes listening to Justice Beale hand down that sentence. And during that time, Justice Beale will essentially recap some of the evidence that we heard earlier in the case. He'll recap some of the offending. He'll talk about some of the mitigating and the aggravating factors that he's considered in relation to her sentence. And then he will deliver that sentence.
And just for our viewers, we will be going to that any moment now. As soon as it begins, we will go to that. Alex, in the meantime, why do you think there has been so much interest in this case?
Yeah, it's absolutely impossible to know. I think from talking to some of those court watchers, a lot of them say that, Erin Patterson could be your next door neighbour. She's very unassuming. She's not a typical murderer, if that makes sense. She's a woman. And the murder weapon used in this case was poisonous mushrooms, which is incredibly peculiar. It's highly unusual. So I think that's one element. I think also the fact that this has happened in a very small Australian town in Gippsland. The community in Leongatha is very small. That is where the lunch was hosted, and then also it takes in victims, this case from Corumburra, another small community where the sole surviving guest of the lunch passed.
We're taking you now to the court.
Erin Patterson, after a long trial, during which you gave evidence that the poisoning of your 4 lunch guests on the 29th of July was an accident, the jury found you guilty of 3 counts of murder and 1 count of attempted murder. In other words, the jury necessarily found that you deliberately served poisoned meals to Gail and Don Patterson and Heather and Ian Wilkinson, and that you did so intending to kill them. Only Ian Wilkinson survived. The maximum penalty for murder is life imprisonment, and for attempted murder, 25 years imprisonment. Murder is also a standard sentence offence, and the standard sentence offence for murder is 25 years imprisonment. The prosecution submits, and your counsel concedes, that your offending falls into the worst category of offending for these offences, and that you should receive the maximum penalties for your crimes. I agree, for reasons that I will come to in due course. The prosecution also submits that, having regard to the horrendous nature of your crimes, I should not fix a non-parole period. In other words, the prosecution submits that you should never have the opportunity of being released from prison on parole. Your counsel challenged this submission, relying principally on the harsher than usual conditions of your imprisonment, which both sides agree are likely to continue for the foreseeable future. Whether or not to fix a non-parole period is the main dispute which I have to determine. These sentencing reasons consist of 4 parts. First, the circumstances of the offences. Second, your circumstances. Third, relevant sentencing law. And fourth, the actual sentences. It is convenient at this stage to mention one aspect of sentencing law. Where the prosecution alleges circumstances that aggravate your offending, the prosecution must prove those circumstances beyond reasonable doubt. Where the defence alleges circumstances of mitigation, the defence must prove those circumstances on the balance of probabilities. Just before I turn to the circumstances of your offences, I note that at your trial the prosecution conceded that they could not prove motive. As is standard, I directed the jury that the prosecution did not have to prove motive, only the elements of the offences, and that, quote, some murders occur for no apparent reason. The motives for such murders may only ever be known to the offenders. Clearly, the jury was satisfied beyond reasonable doubt that you committed the alleged offences. Only you know why you committed them. I will not be speculating about that matter. I will begin my discussion of the circumstances of your offences with the fact that you were familiar with the iNaturalist website from at least May 2022. That is a website on which people can post and view sightings of death-cap mushrooms, amongst other things. On the 28th of May 22, you accessed the iNaturalist website and navigated to its worldwide map in relation to sightings of death-cap mushrooms. Using that map, you accessed information concerning the sighting of death-cap mushrooms in Moorabbin, a suburb of Melbourne. In late 22, a dispute arose between you and your estranged husband, Simon Patterson, regarding child support payments for your two young children who live with you. In December 22, you referred to that dispute in your communications with a Facebook Messenger group with whom you shared an interest in true crime. You were scathing in your remarks about both Simon and his parents, Don and Gail Patterson. Amongst other things, you derided your father-in-law's suggestion that you and Simon get together and pray for your children, commenting, quote, this family, I swear to fucking God. You called them, quote, a lost cause. You wondered whether they had, quote, any capacity for self-reflection at all. You said, quote, fuck 'em, and that you suspected the best thing you could do was, quote, just to forget about all of them and live your life. You accused Simon of, quote, gaslighting you, and Don and Gail of using, quote, weasel words. You called Simon, quote, a deadbeat, and wondered why Gail was not, quote, horrified by his stance regarding child support. According to your testimony at trial, and to a lesser extent Simon's testimony, the dispute over child support had resolved by early 23. On the 18th of April 23, one Christine McKenzie, a former poison specialist, was visiting her daughter in Lock, which is a small town about a 25-minute drive northwest of Leongatha, where you lived. Miss McKenzie observed death-cap mushrooms in Lock Reserve and posted details of her observations, including photographs, on the iNaturalist's website the same day. Ms McKenzie disposed of all the death-cap mushrooms that she could find because of the danger she thought they posed, especially to young children. On the morning of the 28th of April 23, your mobile phone, which was never recovered by investigators, connected to certain cell towers consistent with a possible visit by you to the Lock Reserve. That afternoon, you purchased a food dehydrator in Leongatha. Between the 28th of April and the 4th of May 23, you photographed forage mushrooms on the trays of your dehydrator. The images were found by investigators on a Samsung tablet later seized from your home. Dr. Tom May, a world-renowned expert in fungi, gave evidence at your trial that those images were, quote, consistent with death-cap mushrooms to a high degree of confidence. On the 21st of May 23, Dr. May observed death-cap mushrooms in Nielsen Street, Outram. Outram is a small town about a 23-minute drive southwest of Leongatha. Later that day, Dr. May posted details of his observations, including photographs, on the iNaturalist website. On the morning of the 22nd of May 23, your phone connected to certain cell towers, consistent with a possible visit by you to Lock Reserve. Later that morning, your phone connected to certain cell towers, consistent with a possible visit by you to Nielsen Street, Outram. On the 24th of June 23, you hosted a lunch at your Leongatha home attended by Don and Gail and your children. You had invited Simon to that lunch, but he declined, saying in a text message, quote, "Hi, Erin. Thank you for your kind lunch invite, together with Mum and Dad. I'm sorry, I'll decline, as I feel too uncomfortable about it." Between the 28th of June and the 7th of July 23, there were a series of messages between you and Gail in which you falsely represented that you had undergone a needle biopsy for a lump in your arm and an MRI. In response to a message from Gail as to how you got on with your medical tests, you messaged her on the 7th of July 23 that, quote, "There's a bit to digest with everything that's come out of it all. I might talk more about it with you both when I see you in person." On the 16th of July 23, you attended the Sunday service at the Corumburra Baptist Church, where Ian Wilkinson was and is the pastor. After the service, you invited Gail and Don Patterson and Heather and Ian Wilkinson to lunch at your home at Gibson Street, Leongatha, on the 29th of July 23. Both the Pattersons and the Wilkinsons were surprised by the invitation, as the Wilkinsons had never previously been invited to a meal at your home. You also invited Simon, telling him that you had invited his parents and his aunt and uncle. You told him you had some important medical news which you wanted to discuss at the lunch and that you did not want the children to be present. Simon initially accepted your invitation and informed his parents that the purpose of the lunch was to discuss your medical issues and how to inform the children. On the evening of the 28th of July 23, Simon and you exchanged messages. Simon's read, quote, "Sorry, I feel too uncomfortable about coming to the lunch with you, Mum, Dad, Heather and Ian tomorrow. But I am happy to talk about your health and implications of that at another time if you'd like to discuss on the phone. Just let me know." You replied 5 minutes later, quote, "That's really disappointing. I've spent many hours this week preparing lunch for tomorrow, which has been exhausting in light of the issues I'm facing, and spent a small fortune on beef eye fillet to make beef Wellingtons because I wanted it to be a special meal, as I may not be able to host a lunch like this again for some time. It's important to me that you're all there tomorrow and that I can have the conversations that I need to have. I hope you'll change your mind. Your parents and Heather and Ian are coming at 12:30. I hope to see you there." On Saturday the 29th of July 23, you served your 4 lunch guests individual beef Wellingtons, which were deliberately poisoned with death cap mushrooms. You gave evidence at your trial that had Simon attended the lunch, you would also have served him a beef Wellington. I accept the evidence of Ian Wilkinson that you served your guests their meals on 4 grey plates, while your individual beef Wellington was on a smaller orangey tan coloured plate, a fact that Heather also commented on to Ian and Simon the next day. I find that you did this to ensure that you did not mistakenly consume a poisoned meal. I also accept the evidence of Ian Wilkinson that at the conclusion of the meal, you falsely told your guests that you had been diagnosed with cancer and sought their advice as to whether and how you should break the news to your children that you had a life-threatening illness. Not long after this conversation started, your son and his friend, who had gone to a movie, returned home. The conversation about cancer ceased, but not before all your lunch guests, at Ian's suggestion, prayed for your health. Soon after, they left. Around midnight to 1 a.m. on Sunday the 30th of July 23, all of your lunch guests fell seriously ill, suffering repeated vomiting and diarrhoea. On Sunday morning, Gail and Don informed Simon of their conditions and called an ambulance which took them to nearby Corumburra Hospital. Simon attended the Wilkinsons' home to find that Heather and Ian were similarly unwell. He took them first to Corumburra Hospital but was redirected to Leongatha Hospital because of limited resources. By way of contrast, you made a round trip of approximately 2 hours on Sunday afternoon to take your son to a flying lesson at Tyabb. By the Sunday evening, Don and Gail had been transferred to Dandenong Hospital. On the morning of Monday the 31st of July 23, Ian and Heather were also transferred to Dandenong Hospital. Later that day, Gail and Don were transferred to the Austin Hospital, as were Heather and Ian on Tuesday the 1st of August 23. All of them were experiencing advanced multiple organ failure. Having learned from Simon on the Sunday that your parents-in-law had been hospitalised, you attended Leongatha Hospital on the Monday, complaining of diarrhoea. You did not stay long. Shortly after a doctor indicated to you that death cap mushroom poisoning was suspected, you left, despite warnings by another doctor and nurse that your life was in danger. You returned over an hour and a half later. When you returned, you showed reluctance to receive treatment for suspected death cap mushroom poisoning and to organise a medical assessment for your children who were at school. Medical staff were urging you to have the children assessed because you claimed, falsely, that on the Sunday night you fed them the leftovers of the beef Wellingtons with the pastry and mushrooms scraped off. Eventually, you arranged with Simon to collect the children and bring them to hospital. On the Monday morning, police recovered beef Wellington remains from a bin outside your home, which were later found to contain death cap mushroom toxins. On the Monday afternoon, you were transferred to Monash Medical Centre in Clayton. Simon brought the children there. You and the children were kept in hospital overnight for observation. At both Leongatha Hospital and Monash Medical Centre, you were asked by various people, including doctors and representatives of the Health Department and the Child Protection Service, where you had sourced the mushrooms for the beef Wellingtons. You said you had purchased some fresh mushrooms at Woolworths and some dried mushrooms from an Asian grocery. You were vague about the location of the Asian grocery, claiming you had purchased the dried mushrooms several months before and that the shop could have been in one of a number of suburbs that fall within the boundaries of the city of Monash. You denied having foraged for mushrooms, a lie repeated in your recorded police interview on the 5th of August 23. At your trial, you maintained the story about having sourced some of the mushrooms from an Asian grocery, but testified that in May and June of 23, you had foraged for edible mushrooms in various places, including the Corumburra Botanical Gardens. You testified that you had dehydrated these mushrooms and put them in a container which contained the dried mushrooms from the Asian grocery, and that you used the dried mushrooms in that container along with the fresh mushrooms from Woolworths in the beef Wellingtons. You testified that in this way, death cap mushrooms must have accidentally found their way into the meals served to your lunch guests. The jury rejected this elaborate explanation. They found that you deliberately poisoned the meals of your lunch guests. I am satisfied that your vague story about the Asian grocery was a lie. When you realised that the lie would not work because death cap mushrooms cannot be cultivated commercially, and there were no other reports of people falling ill from mushrooms purchased at Asian groceries, you changed tack. You concocted the story you told the jury about foraged mushrooms ending up in the container with the Asian grocery mushrooms and then accidentally ending up in the beef Wellingtons. On the afternoon of Tuesday the 1st of August 23, you and the children were discharged from Monash Hospital. On the morning of the 2nd of August 23, you disposed of your dehydrator at a local tip, the Coonawarra transfer station. On the 4th of August 23, investigators recovered your dehydrator from the tip. Forensic examination revealed that the dehydrator contained traces of death cap mushrooms. That same day, 4th of August 23, Heather Wilkinson, aged 66, and Gail Patterson, aged 70, died from death cap mushroom poisoning. And Don Patterson, who was desperately ill, was given a liver transplant. On the 5th of August 23, the police executed a search warrant at your home. You handed over a dummy phone. It was not the phone that you had been using throughout most of 23, the phone which on the 28th of April 23 had connected to certain cell towers indicating a possible visit to Locke, and which on the 22nd of May 23 had connected to certain cell towers indicating possible visits to Locke and Outram. In your recorded interview following the search, you denied having foraged for mushrooms and denied owning a dehydrator. Late on the 5th of August 23, Don Patterson, aged 70, died from death cap mushroom poisoning. Ian Wilkinson very nearly died, but gradually his condition improved. On the 21st of August 23, he was discharged from the intensive care unit to a ward at the Austin Hospital. On the 11th of September 23, he was moved to the Heidelberg Repatriation Hospital. On the 21st of September 23, he was discharged home. He has not fully recovered. He has reduced kidney function, ongoing respiratory issues and reduced energy. On the 2nd of November 23, the police executed another search warrant at your home, seizing more electrical devices. You were arrested and charged. You have been in custody ever since. Let me now summarise the aggravating circumstances of your offending. Your offending, which resulted in the death of 3 people and near death of another, involved substantial premeditation. I am satisfied that by the 16th of July 23, when you unusually invited Simon, his parents and his aunt and uncle to a lunch without the children to discuss your non-existent medical issues, you did so with the intention of killing them all. The dehydrator, which you purchased in late April 23, enabled you to preserve death cap mushrooms, which you put into the individual beef Wellingtons served to your guests. Whether those death cap mushrooms came from Locke on the 28th of April 23, or from Locke or Outram on the 22nd of May 23, or from another location in May or June of 23, as you suggested in your testimony, is in my view of no great moment. After learning from Simon on Sunday the 30th of July 23 that some or all of your lunch guests had been hospitalised, you showed no pity for your victims. Instead of informing those treating the Pattersons and Wilkinsons that you had used foraged mushrooms, which you could have done without having to admit that you had deliberately poisoned their meals, you repeatedly denied foraging, insisting that the mushrooms for the beef Wellingtons were sourced solely from Woolworths and an Asian grocery. We will never know whether revealing the use of foraged mushrooms would have made a difference. But the administration of the drug psilocybin, which is a specific antidote for death cap mushroom poisoning, was not commenced on the 30th of July 23 because at that stage the evidence regarding the type of toxin was inconclusive. Similarly, the administration of NAC to preserve the victims' livers from toxins was not commenced until almost midnight on the 30th of July 23 for Don Patterson and on the 31st of July 23 for the others. The prosecution submitted that I should infer from your pitiless behaviour that your intention to kill was ongoing and that this constitutes an additional aggravating circumstance. I accept that submission. As the Wilkinsons' daughter, Ruth Dubois, remarked in her victim impact statement, you, quote, followed through on your lethal plan. Your lunch guests each suffered severe gastrointestinal illness on the Sunday and Monday prior to being sedated and mechanically ventilated. Their suffering was protracted. And Ian Wilkins suffers ongoing health issues. This aggravates your offending. The prosecution submitted that you must have anticipated that your victims would suffer in the way they did. I am satisfied of that beyond reasonable doubt. It is implausible that you would have selected death cap mushrooms without ascertaining how they would work upon your victims. Further, the devastating impact of your crimes is not limited to your direct victims. Your crimes have harmed a great many people. I will expand on this aggravating circumstance when I turn to the victim impact statements. In addition to denying the use of foraged mushrooms, you engaged in an elaborate cover-up of your guilt. I find that you disposed of the 4 grey plates on which you served the poisoned beef Wellingtons. You falsely made out that you had fed your children leftover beef Wellingtons with the pastry and mushrooms scraped off. You feigned illness. You disposed of the dehydrator soon after you were released from hospital. You maintained the vague story about sourcing dried mushrooms at an Asian grocery and had the gall to tell police in your recorded police interview that you had been very, very helpful to the health department in its investigation of the incident. You disposed of your phone and provided police with a dummy phone. You lied to the police in your recorded police interview about various matters. Finally, and most importantly, your offending involved an enormous betrayal of trust. Your victims were all your relatives by marriage. More than that, they had all been good to you and your children over many years, as you acknowledged in your testimony. Not only did you cut short 3 lives and cause lasting damage to Ian Wilkinson's health, thereby devastating the extended Patterson and Wilkinson families, you inflicted untold suffering on your own children, whom you robbed of their beloved grandparents. The victim impact statements reveal the immense and ongoing anguish suffered by your many victims, direct and indirect. No summary could do justice to the individual and collective power of those statements. It is not my intention here to summarise or refer to every statement, but rather to highlight some key aspects. 4 generations of the extended Patterson and Wilkinson families have been traumatised by your crimes, not to mention their friends. Don's mother, Martha Patterson, who is aged 100, made a victim impact statement. In it, she prayed for God's healing for her family. Gail and Heather's father, now deceased, also reached his 100th birthday in 2024, but tragically only one of his 3 daughters, Lynn Young, whose statement was read to the court, was alive to mark that milestone with him. And there are many references in the statements to the trauma experienced by the Patterson and Wilkinson grandchildren. Many of your adult victims struggled not only with the loss of their loved ones and the terrible way they died, but with the distress, even guilt, at their own seeming inability to ease the suffering of those close to them. They keenly feel their limitations, and in particular, the impossibility of shielding the youngest from the incessant discussion of the case in the media, online, in public spaces, even in the schoolyard. Many also struggled to cope with work and studies, and many have experienced additional financial burdens. There is, of course, great anger at the callousness of your actions. To take just one example, Ian Wilkinson's sister, Dorothy Dicker, questions, quote, how anyone could sit there and watch those 4 kind and caring people eat that meal. Your failure to exhibit any remorse pours salt into all the victims' wounds. The children of your direct victims speak of the distress of watching their parents suffer in hospital. For example, Don and Gail's son Matthew remarks, quote, watching my parents suffer in hospital from severe poisoning caused shock, grief and lasting trauma. Ian and Heather's son David remembers his mother being, quote, desperate for water, which she was not allowed by medical staff, and saying her, quote, insides were burning. David also mentions his father's tortured experience, quote, black lips, gaunt face, pained and serious expression. At your plea hearing, Ian Wilkinson memorably read his victim impact statement to the court. Amongst other things, he humbly expressed his great admiration and love for his wife, Heather, and his concern for others, even you. He offered you forgiveness for what you did to him. Quote, In regards to the many harms done to me, I make an offer of forgiveness to Erin. I say harms done to me advisedly. I have no power or responsibility to forgive harms done to others. However, I encourage Erin to receive my offer of forgiveness for those harms done to me with full confession and repentance. I bear her no ill will. That offer of forgiveness presents you with an opportunity. You would do well to embrace it in the manner he suggests. In commenting on the unprecedented coverage of your case, Ian Wilkinson also made this point, quote, "It's one of the distressing shortcomings of our society that so much attention is showered on those who do evil and so little on those who do good." Your lunch guests undoubtedly belong to that company of people among us who do good. The victim impact statements make it clear that each one of them, over many years, gave of themselves generously and made lasting contributions to many, many lives, and in Ian's case continues to make. All of them, inspired by their Christian faith, were deeply invested not only in their families but in their wider communities, as the statements from members of the Currumborough Baptist Church attest. A word that is used again and again in the statements to describe your crimes is, quote, senseless. But what also surfaces in the statements is hope and gratitude for the care shown by others. Don and Gail's daughter, Anna Terrington, writes, quote, "We have to say goodbye for now to Mum and Dad and Heather." Don's brother Colin writes, quote, "As Christians, they were people of hope, and sharing that hope, my loss is not one marked by despair." Ruth Dubois expresses her great appreciation for the efforts made and compassion shown by the medical teams. Simon Patterson gives thanks, quote, "for the incredibly strong, gentle, patient and caring support from friends, family, schools, our own church congregation, the wider church, colleagues, work clients, neighbours, police, government officers and our professional counsellors. We have experienced love in a special way since the murders." I will conclude my account of key aspects of the victim impact statements with what Don and Gail's son Matthew had to say about your betrayal of trust. Quote, "Erin was embraced as part of the Patterson family. She was welcomed and treated with genuine love and respect in a way she did not appear to experience from her own family. Her actions represent a profound and devastating betrayal of the trust and love extended to her. Having regard to the aggravating circumstances of your offending and the victim impact statements, I have no hesitation in finding that your offending falls into the worst category for the offences of murder and attempted murder. As the case law makes clear, the fact that it is possible to imagine even worse instances of such offences does not refute that categorisation. The gravity of your offending warrants the imposition of the maximum penalties for your crimes. I turn then to your circumstances. The information I was provided about your personal history was minimal. Your counsel simply relied on the personal history you provided in your trial testimony. There were no psychiatric or psychological reports provided, no references from character witnesses. No doubt that approach to your plea hearing was based on your instructions, but it means the account of your personal history that I am about to give is limited. You were born in Adelaide on the 30th of September 1974, making you 48 years old at the time of your offending and 50 now. Your maiden name was Scudder. In 1977, your family relocated to Melbourne, residing in Hampton. In 2004, you and Simon Patterson met whilst you were both employed at Monash City Council. Simon told the jury that he was working there as a civil engineer and you were the RSPCA's representative on the council. By 2005, you and Simon were romantically involved. In 2006, your grandmother died, leaving you a substantial inheritance. Monies from her estate were distributed between 2007 and 2015. During those years, you would be generous with your money to Simon's siblings, providing large, no-interest loans to them and their spouses so that they could purchase their own homes. On the 2nd of June 2007, you and Simon married. You told the jury that your parents did not attend the wedding. They were holidaying in Russia. Soon after your marriage, you and Simon travelled around Australia and overseas for a few months before settling in Perth. Simon got a job working for an inner-city shire council. In 2009, when you were 34, your son was born. In April 2009, you and Simon set off with the baby to explore the top end of Australia. You reached Townsville in November 2009, at which point you parted company. You flew back to Perth. Simon drove back with the baby. You rented a cottage for you and the baby. Simon rented an on-site caravan close by. This was the first of many comparatively short-term separations. You reunited by the end of January 2010. In 2011, your father died. In that year, you also opened a second-hand bookshop in Pemberton, Western Australia. In 2013, when you were pregnant, you and Simon returned to Victoria with your son to live closer to Simon's family. In 2014, your daughter was born. In 2015, you and Simon separated permanently. In 2019, your mother died, leaving you an inheritance. In June 22, you and your children moved into a newly constructed home at 84 Gibson Street, Leongatha, the home at which you served the fatal lunch on the 29th of July 23. You have no relevant criminal history. You maintain your innocence. In other words, there is no evidence of remorse. I turn now to the conditions of your imprisonment. As mentioned, you have been in custody since the 2nd of November 23. There were 2 affidavits tendered relating to your conditions of imprisonment. The first was sworn by a solicitor who acts for you and was based largely on your instructions. The second affidavit was sworn by Jennifer Hosking, Assistant Commissioner, Sentence Management Division at Corrections Victoria, who also testified at your plea hearing. Ms Hosking's evidence included confirmation of the following matters. You have a, quote, maximum security rating and, quote, major offender status. Because of the nature of your crimes and your notoriety, you have been assessed as being at significant risk from other prisoners. You have not been assessed as posing a risk to other prisoners. You have spent approximately 16 months of your 22 months at Dame Phyllis Frost Centre in a management unit called the Gordon Unit, and the rest of the time in a protection unit called the Murray Unit. A management unit is more restrictive than a protection unit. You have been in the Gordon Unit continuously for the last 15 months. The Gordon Unit has about 20 cells. You are not permitted to mix with the other women in the Gordon Unit. You have spent at least 22 hours in your cell every day that you have been in the Gordon Unit. There have been 16 days since November 24 where, because of lockdowns, you have been confined to your cell for the entire 24 hours per day. The maximum period that a prisoner in the Gordon Unit could have out of their cell on any given day is 4 hours, but, quote, that wouldn't happen very often. Your meals and medicine are currently delivered through a flap in your cell door. There is a small concrete yard, approximately 2 metres by 1.5 metres, which adjoins your cell, which, with permission, you may access for fresh air. If prisoners are using the larger exercise yard, which abuts your exercise yard, you may not use your small yard. During your time in the Gordon Unit, you have barely had any contact with other individuals. Permission is required for you to communicate with any other prisoner, which, according to your counsel, is complicated by the fact that you are not informed of the identities of the other prisoners in the Gordon unit. You currently have approval to communicate with one other prisoner in the Gordon unit through a wire mesh when the two of you are permitted to use your respective adjoining exercise yards. That other prisoner is undergoing a lengthy sentence for terrorism offences and has attacked other prisoners. You did not ask to communicate with that person and have not communicated with her. The suggestion that you should communicate with her was made by a corrections officer. There is an intercom in your cell which, if permission is granted, you may use to communicate with one other prisoner in the unit at a time, but you have not done so. In order to attend any other part of the prison, for example, the visitors' centre or the library, you are driven there escorted by two corrections officers. While, theoretically, prisoners in the Gordon unit are able to access the prison library twice per week for 20 minutes at a time, you have not been able to do so because of staff shortages and a rule that you may not access the library if another is doing so. Consequently, you have only been able to access the library a handful of times during your time in the Gordon unit. United Nations guidelines, known as the Bangkok Rules, provide that a prisoner should not be in separation for more than 15 days at a time, but you have now been in separation continuously for 15 months. There are two prisoners in the Gordon unit who have been there in excess of 3 years. And whilst the primary principle in the placement of prisoners is to manage and place them in the least restrictive environment necessary to ensure the safety and security of the individual prisoner and other prisoners, the least restrictive environment can be very restrictive. As for your future conditions of imprisonment, whilst your placement in the Gordon unit is reviewed monthly, Ms Hosking was unable to say whether you would ever be moved from the Gordon unit. I infer that given the unprecedented media coverage of your case and the books, documentaries and TV series about you, which are all in the pipeline, you are likely to remain a notorious prisoner for many years to come and as such remain at significant risk from other prisoners. I turn then to a number of relevant sentencing principles and rules. Section 5 of the Sentencing Act 1991 declares that the only purposes for which sentences may be imposed are just punishment, specific and general deterrence, rehabilitation, denunciation and protection of the community. I have had regard to all of these sentencing purposes in formulating my sentences, but rehabilitation has taken a back seat because of the gravity of your offending. Other provisions of the Sentencing Act that are of particular relevance to your case are as follows. Under Sections 6A to 6F, you fall to be sentenced as a serious violent offender in respect of the 3 murders, meaning that the protection of the community is the principal purpose for which the sentences on those counts must be imposed. Under Section 6F, your status as a serious violent offender must be entered in the court records. Section 11(1) provides relevantly that if a court sentences an offender to be imprisonment for the term of her natural life, the court must, as part of the sentence, fix a period during which the offender is not eligible to be released on parole, unless it considers that the nature of the offence makes the fixing of such a period inappropriate. Section 11A(4)(a) provides that where an offender is sentenced to life imprisonment, the sentencer must fix a non-parole period of at least 30 years, unless it is not in the interests of justice to do so. Is it inappropriate to fix a non-parole period? Would fixing a non-parole period be contrary to the interests of justice? As mentioned above, this is the main dispute that I have to determine. Sentencing case law establishes that, as a general rule, harsher than normal conditions of imprisonment will warrant mitigation of penalty. There is nothing about your conduct whilst in custody which might cast doubt on the application of that general rule. As Ms Hosking indicated, you are in a management unit to protect you from other prisoners, not vice versa, nor do you have any relevant criminal history. In their written submissions, the prosecution conceded that your conditions of imprisonment are more burdensome than for a mainstream prisoner and that they are likely to remain so for the foreseeable future. The prosecution submitted that this is a, quote, relevant consideration for sentence. In oral submissions, the prosecution conceded that this consideration was not just relevant, but, quote, important and, quote, weighty, while still pressing for life imprisonment with no possibility of parole. You have effectively been held in continuous solitary confinement for the last 15 months, and at the very least, there is a substantial chance that for your protection, you will continue to be held in solitary confinement for years to come. The Court of Appeal in Yatt against the King referred without criticism to the observation that, quote, the adverse health effects of solitary confinement are well established. I note too that Ms Hosking stated at the plea hearing that, quote, being separated has negative outcomes for people. We're very aware of that. The harsh prison conditions that you have experienced already and the likely prospect of solitary confinement for the foreseeable future are important and weighty considerations which should count for something in the sentencing exercise. In my view, the only scope for making them count is by the fixing of a non-parole period. In opposing the imposition of a non-parole period, the prosecution relied on the Queen against Colston, where the offender was sentenced to life imprisonment without a non-parole period for the savage murders of 3 people. But that case makes clear that, quote, where there is a substantial factor pointing towards clemency, as I consider your present and likely future conditions of imprisonment to be, the fixing of a non-parole period may be appropriate even for an offender who has committed multiple murders. Fixing a non-parole period is not to undervalue the horrendous nature of your offending. Your total effective sentence will be life imprisonment, and the period during which you will be ineligible for parole will be a very substantial one. Please stand. For the attempted murder of Ian Wilkinson, I sentence you to 25 years imprisonment. For the murder of Heather Wilkinson, I sentence you to life imprisonment. For the murder of Gail Patterson, I sentence you to life imprisonment. For the murder of Don Patterson, I sentence you to life imprisonment. All sentences are to be served concurrently. The total effective sentence is life imprisonment, and I fix a non-parole period of 33 years. I declare that you have served 676 days by way of pre-sentence detention. Finally, and by consent, I make the disposal order sought by the prosecution. Would you please remove Ms Patterson?
Okay, that was Justice Christopher Beale there, live from the Victorian Supreme Court, sentencing triple murderer Erin Patterson to life in prison with a non-parole period of 33 years. Now, we heard him say to the court there that he had no hesitation in finding that the offending fell into the worst category for the offences of murder and attempted murder. But he acknowledged that Erin Patterson's prison conditions, given her notoriety, are burdensome, and that prompted that non-parole period that he set there. Now, as we saw there, this was a live broadcast, and that is the first time this has been allowed by the Victorian Supreme Court. Our court reporter inside the Supreme Court there described Erin Patterson as sitting in the dock glum-faced as her sentence was being read, blinking rapidly there. Now, Ian Wilkinson, who is the sole guest who survived the mushroom lunch, was sitting about 10 metres to Patterson's left and has been described as having his arms crossed during that sentencing. And this case, of course, revolved around a lunch in July 2023. That was where Erin Patterson served beef Wellington laced with poisonous mushrooms. That was to her in-laws and family friends. 2 years later, in July this year, after a 2-month trial which heard evidence from more than 50 witnesses, Erin Patterson was found guilty of 3 counts of murder and 1 count of attempted murder. So she has been sentenced for that today. The victims in this case, Don and Gail Patterson, Erin's in-laws, both aged 70, and Heather Wilkinson, 66, all 3 of them died. And the 4th victim, Pastor Ian Wilkinson, who I just said was in court there, spent almost 2 months in hospital but did survive that. Now, our court reporter, Alexandra Alvaro, is there outside the Supreme Court and joins us now. Alex, this sentence of life in prison with a non-parole period of 33 years, tell us what Justice Beale had to say about that decision of his.
Yeah, Gemma, you're right. So that is a head sentence of life in prison for the attempted murder of Ian Wilkinson, 25 years for the murder of Heather, life for the murder of Gail Patterson, life, and for the murder of Don Patterson, life in prison. All of those sentences must be served concurrently, and she's been given a non-parole period of 33 years, which would mean that she'd be eligible for parole when she's in her 80s effectively. Now, as you heard there, Justice Beale ran through the offending. He went through essentially a timeline of all the offending that was outlined during the trial, and then he went through some of the aggravating factors, the aggravating circumstances when it came to considering what Erin Patterson's sentence should be. So he spoke about there being substantial premeditation in her offending, that she unusually invited her lunch guests to the lunch with the intention of killing them, that she bought a dehydrator with the intention of preserving death cap mushrooms. She repeatedly denied foraging for mushrooms. And that she followed through on that lethal plan. And this is something that we heard Ian Wilkinson's daughter talk about in her victim impact statement, that she was shocked that at every stage she had the opportunity to not go through with this plan, or to stop it, or to say something about where those mushrooms were from, even after the poisoning had taken place, and she didn't choose to do so. Justice Beale said, you followed through on your lethal plan. He also spoke about the protracted suffering of the victims. He spoke about Ian Wilkinson, who in his victim impact statement said that his health had never come back to normal. He still had reduced liver function. His energy levels were low. And Justice Beale also spoke about the elaborate cover-up that Erin Patterson engaged in after that lunch, that he said that he found that she disposed of the plates that she served the lunch on, that she falsely said that the kids had eaten the leftovers in order to cover her tracks, that she feigned illness, that she disposed of a dehydrator, that she made up a story about the mushrooms coming fresh from Woolworths and also dehydrated from an Asian grocer story. He accepted that that was a lie. And he also said that Erin had the gall to tell police that she'd been very helpful to the health authorities who were trying to find the origin of these mushrooms. They were scouring every Asian grocery store in the area that she'd described in order to determine whether poisonous mushrooms had made their way into the supply chain. He also said, Justice Beale said in his sentencing, that this offending portrayed an enormous betrayal of trust. All of these people, Erin Patterson's victims, had been good to her. They had accepted her as if they were her own daughter, and yet she devastated that extended family, and she caused even untold suffering onto her children, who have now been denied their grandparents. Their grandparents are now dead. He went through the victim impact statements that were read out to the court when we were last in court. He said that Erin Patterson's failure to exhibit remorse pours salt into the victims, into the wounds of victims rather. Her lack of remorse, of course, Erin Patterson still maintains her innocence. He spoke about Ian Wilkinson's victim impact statement, that he humbly expressed his love for Heather, but also the fact that he offered Erin Patterson forgiveness. And Justice Beale said that, you know, this offer presents an opportunity and you would do well to take it. That is what he said to Erin Patterson during his sentencing. He said, I have no hesitation in finding that your offending falls into the worst category of offending. And this warrants the maximum penalty, which obviously we heard in his sentence, life in prison with a non-parole period imposed of 33 years. Now, the reason he said that he imposed that non-parole period is because he wanted to take into account the tough conditions that Erin Patterson faces in prison. She is a notorious prison. She is very high profile, and for that reason, other prisoners present a risk to her. She spends a very long time each day in her cell, 22 to 24 hours. It's beyond the UN conventions. There is just some action happening behind me.
I was going to ask you about that. I mean, Alex,
Erin
it was
Patterson
a packed
may leave
courtroom.
the court soon.
Yeah, it was a packed courtroom there, and we are seeing quite a bit of activity behind you there. Are we expecting anyone to speak outside of court?
We're not sure if the family will speak. Obviously, we heard that Ian Wilkinson was in the courtroom, but as of yet, he hasn't spoken to media even after the verdict was delivered. So it's unknown whether he will make a statement. So stand by for that. But I think the hustle and bustle happening behind me is likely to do with the fact that Erin Patterson is probably being loaded back into the prison van now, and it's likely that she'll leave court.
And of course, you know, we've been watching the live feed of this sentence, and some were in the courtroom, as we say, it was packed. We had our reporter, Sash Payne, in there, who will be joining us shortly to describe Erin Patterson and, you know, her movements in there and how she reacted to that sentence. The judge in there made that point that Erin Patterson has shown no remorse. What did he have to say about that?
Well, that's exactly right. Because Erin Patterson maintains her innocence, he couldn't consider that element as a kind of mitigating factor. Usually, if an offender has entered an early guilty plea or if they admit some kind of remorse, that does something to minimise their sentence. In this case, this is not something that Justice Beale could consider because Erin Patterson denies that she poisoned the guests, deliberately poisoned the guests, and that she did that intentionally. So Justice Beale couldn't take that into account when he was delivering his sentence. The other things that he did take into account, though, as I was saying, were the difficult circumstances that she's facing in prison. So she has barely any other contact with any other prisoners. The only prisoner she's permitted to speak to is the one, I think, next door to her cell. This is a convicted terrorist who's known to attack other prisoners, and Erin Patterson hasn't made any efforts to speak to her. And she's also likely to remain notorious. As you can imagine, the interest in this case is not going away. Justice Beale referred to the many different types of media that are in progress around this case, including news coverage, books, podcasts, documentaries, and for this reason she will remain a notorious prisoner. And for that reason, she does need to be kept in relative security, and that means that she doesn't have the same access to prison activities that the other prisoners have. For example, you know, going to the library, she's only been able to do that a couple of times because in order to access the library, she needs to be flanked by security guards. So these are some of the things that Justice Beale took into account, and he said, you know, the non-parole period, fixing that non-parole period was really the only way he could acknowledge those difficulties.
And Alex, are we expecting an appeal?
An appeal. So Erin Patterson now from this date has 28 days to lodge an appeal. I think the date then for the expiry of that would be October 6th. So during this time, her lawyers may make an announcement that an appeal is on foot. We just don't know that. Her lawyers haven't spoken so far. We didn't hear them speak even after the verdict. So it's not clear whether Erin Patterson will appeal, but if she does, she'll have the opportunity to appeal on either the conviction or the sentence or both. So whether she chooses to do that is still unknown.
Alexandra Alvaro outside the Supreme Court, thank you, and we will return to Alex shortly. But I'm joined now by Associate Professor in Criminology and Justice at RMIT University, Brianna Chesser. Brianna Chesser, thank you for your time. Firstly, can I get your reaction to this sentence?
Look, I think the sentence was as we were expecting. in the defence submissions during the pre-sentence plea and in the prosecution submissions, they really agreed that we were looking here at a term of life imprisonment for Ms Patterson. The point of contention really was the non-parole period, and Justice Beale today set that at 33 years.
And, generally speaking, what does a judge factor in with deciding a sentence, and how was that applied in the Erin Patterson case?
Look, Justice Beale really weighed all of the considerations in the Sentencing Act. He directed us to the fact that Ms Patterson is now viewed as a serious violent offender, and as such, the protection of the community was the sentencing provision that he gave the most weight to.
Now, we just discussed the point there with our reporter, Alexandra Alvaro, but Justice Beale made the point that Erin Patterson has shown no remorse. Why is that important?
Look, I think where we've had an accused person admit their involvement and assist the police, Justice Beale made a point that should Ms Patterson have shared information, she may well have saved or mitigated some of the pain and suffering for some of her victims. What we're looking for there is an acknowledgement of the impact of the crime, and as such, the court can then take that into account.
And there was also the point made that no psychiatric reports were submitted. Were you surprised by that?
Yes, look, I was surprised by that, particularly given the nature of Ms Patterson's testimony herself, which alluded to some mental health issues that she had been experiencing. But Justice Beale rightly pointed out that counsel were likely acting on Ms Patterson's instructions in not preparing psychological or psychiatric reports to provide some context in the pre-sentence hearing.
And Judge Beale addressed motive. He said it was not required. He said to Erin Patterson directly, "Only you know why you committed them," meaning the offences. "I will not be speculating about that matter." What was your reaction to that? Because motive is often a crucial factor. When is it not, and why not in this case?
Look, I think motive is relevant where you require motive to be able to understand why the offence has happened. I think the police and the investigators had so much collateral information that there was no need for the motive to be filled in. Justice Beale quite rightly said that Ms Patterson is in fact the only person who understands why she acted the way that she did, but in these circumstances it wasn't why that was relevant, it was what she did and the impact of what she did.
This was always a question of whether a non-parole period would be set. The Justice Beale did take that route, but 33 years. But of course, as we know, the prosecution was pushing for life imprisonment with no parole. What was taken into account for Erin Patterson in terms of those conditions that she has been enduring and what we heard there from Justice Beale?
Look, I think Justice Beale was really minded by the fact that Ms Patterson is experiencing conditions that many, many other prisoners do not experience. He referred to the UN Convention on the Rights of Prisoners and identified that Ms Patterson has spent in excess of 22 days in 24-hour solitary confinement. These things are extremely important because even prisoners have right to self-determination and have rights under the UN Convention. So Justice Beale was minded, I think, in setting the non-parole period of 33 years, that the conditions that Ms Patterson is experiencing are unusual in prison and that ought to be taken into account.
And if and when parole is granted, what does it mean?
Well, look, Ms Patterson will have the opportunity to make submissions
I'll
before...
in fact, interrupt you there, Brianna. Apologies, because Ian Wilkinson is speaking. We'll go to that live.
Firstly, to Victoria Police, in particular, the Homicide Squad and the team led by Detective Stephen Eppingstall. They made a professional, efficient and effective investigation into what happened at the lunch. They brought to light the truth of what happened with the death of 3 good people. We're grateful for their skills that brought this truth to light. And I'm also very grateful for the kindness and compassion they showed us, me and my family, throughout the long process that has brought us to this day. They've done a wonderful job. I'd like to extend gratitude too to the team from the Office of Public Prosecutions, led by Senior Counsel Nanette Rogers. The court processes are a little bewildering to lay people like me, and we're grateful for their expertise, their hard work, and their perseverance that has secured this conviction. I'd also like to commend them for their kindness and compassion showed to us throughout this long process. They have also done a wonderful job. We're also grateful for the staff of the various public health services that played an important role in dealing with the aftermath of the lunch. There are so many services and agencies and people involved that I can't start naming names. But please, each one, accept my sincere gratitude for the part that you have played in this process. We're thankful that when things go wrong, there are good people and services and systems available to help us recover. I'd like to encourage all those involved to keep turning up and serving others. Our lives and the life of our community depends on the kindness of others. I'd like to encourage everybody to be kind to each other. Finally, I want to say thank you to the many people from across Australia and around the world who, through their prayers and messages of support, have encouraged us. I thank the people of the Leongatha and Currumbara communities in particular. Your thoughtfulness and care has been a great encouragement to us. That's all I wish to say for now. Please respect our privacy as we continue to grieve and heal. Thank you for listening. I hope you all have a great day. Thank you.
And that was live there from outside the Victorian Supreme Court. Ian Wilkinson, the sole surviving guest of that lunch, showing grace, expressing his gratitude there after the court process and the sentencing today. That breaking news we have had. Erin Patterson, the mushroom murderer, triple murderer who has been sentenced to life in prison with a non-parole period of 33 years. With Justice Beale there today in that live broadcast in what was a first for the Victorian Supreme Court. Telling the court he had no hesitation in finding that the offending falls into the worst category for the offences of murder and attempted murder. But he also acknowledged there the prison conditions that Erin Patterson has been subjected to, given her notoriety and the fact that she has to be separated for so many hours of the day, and then granting that non-parole period of 33 years, which he had the option not to grant in that. Now, our reporter Alexandra Alvaro is outside the Supreme Court and joins us once again. Alex, we just heard there from Ian Wilkinson, and we know that his victim impact statement was key during this process. How has he conducted himself, and how important was his testimony in this?
Yeah, look, Ian Wilkinson has been, he's been part of this trial every day. He was listening to evidence throughout that 11 weeks, every single day, displaying a huge amount of stoicism, usually with his arms crossed with a pretty neutral expression in the courtroom. Today, same thing in court from all accounts, and he's just spoken outside the court, as you heard. But in terms of his victim impact statement, last time we were in court, he said that essentially it's one of the distressing shortcomings of society that in these cases so much attention is showered on the accused, but when it comes to the victims, we hear much less. And today, just when he spoke, he reminded everybody to be kind and asked for people to respect his privacy. But again, in the victim impact statement, he said the greatest impact of Erin's actions was robbing him of Heather's company, his wife Heather's company, that there was little joy now in pottering around the house and garden. He was now living a single life. And that he lives with ongoing health issues to his liver. Of course, we know that death cap mushroom poisoning has a huge impact on one's liver. Part of treatment for death cap mushroom poisoning is to use liver protecting medication. So he still has issues with that. He still has low energy levels. And he also offered Erin Patterson forgiveness, which was incredibly powerful in court last time we were here. He said, "I bear her no ill will. I hope that she uses her time in jail to become a better person. And I am no longer Erin Patterson's victim. She has now become a victim of my kindness." So just speaking outside court now, he thanked police for bringing the truth of the lunch to light. He said he was grateful for their kindness, for their compassion. He thanked the Office of Public Prosecutions for their hard work. He said they did a wonderful job. He was grateful to the staff. He encouraged all of those involved in this trial to keep turning up and serving others. He said our lives and the lives of others depends on the kindness of others. He encouraged everybody to be kind to each other. He thanked people for their messages, their well wishes, their prayers. He thanked the people of the Leongatha and Corumburra communities for their thoughtfulness and their care and encouragement. And again, he said, well, he asked for people to respect his family's privacy and the privacy of the community as they continue to grieve. And we know that this offending will have an impact for a very long time to come on this small community.
I appreciate that some viewers may be just joining us. Recapping that breaking news, Erin Patterson has been sentenced to life in prison with a non-parole period of 33 years for the triple murder in Victoria. And the Justice Beale telling the court that he had no hesitation in finding that her offending fell into the worst category for the offences of murder and attempted murder. Alex, he did acknowledge, though, that the prison conditions for Erin Patterson, given her notoriety, they were burdensome.
Yes. Yeah, so essentially he was saying the only way he could acknowledge those challenges that she was facing in jail and the extreme isolation that she was experiencing and the hard conditions of her custody was through imposing a non-parole period of 33 years. So it's a life sentence, but she will be eligible for parole when she is in her 80s. And some of those challenges were rehashed today. Justice Beale spoke about her essentially having no contact with any other prisoners, that it was difficult for her in prison, that her only neighbour was a convicted terrorist in prison. That was the only person she was permitted to speak to. She's not allowed to go anywhere unsupervised. She has limited access to the library. But we also heard some other things about her custody last time we were in court, that she's an avid crocheter, that she has crochet in her cell. She has access to a TV, to a hair straightener. So these are some of the things we heard during that plea hearing when both parties were kind of going through the aggravating and mitigating factors that they believed Justice Beale should take into account when sentencing. Now, when Justice Beale was running through his sentencing, the aggravating factors he ran through were quite a bit. The list was quite a bit longer than when he was talking about Erin Patterson's personal circumstances and the impact that would have on his sentencing. And he said the reason for that is because her legal team hadn't supplied much information about her personal circumstances, and obviously that's on instruction from her. But for that reason, that portion of Justice Beale's sentencing was relatively short.
Alexandra Alvaro outside the Victorian Supreme Court. We'll return to you shortly. Let's return once again to Associate Professor in Criminology and Justice at RMIT University, Brianna Chesser, who joins us once again. Brianna, as we left off just before, when we were hearing from Ian Wilkinson, I was asking you the question of what is parole when it is granted, if and when it is granted?
So parole, someone becomes eligible for parole by notation by the court, so in this case, in 33 years for Ms Patterson. Parole is a process by which the prisoner can apply to the parole board to get essentially early release on particular conditions from prison.
And, that's a 33-year period, so that is some time away. What are the appeal options here for Erin Patterson and her legal team?
Well, look, Ms Patterson's legal team has got 28 days from today to be able to consider whether or not they would like to file. They must file before that 28-day period is up. And they can look at an appeal on two grounds: the conviction itself and then the sentence.
And, of course, this is the first time the Victorian Supreme Court allowed this live broadcasting of a sentence. What did you make of that decision, and, what can be gained from that?
Look, I think it's an example of the Victorian Supreme Court acknowledging the importance of this particular decision, not only for the people who are involved in Ms Patterson's case, but also for the Victorian public. It's the first time that we've been able to watch that sentence live. I think it means that the Victorian public now has more access to elements of the criminal justice system that may well have been conducted behind closed doors.
And what was key for you when you listened to Justice Beale's sentencing remarks today?
Look, I think Justice Beale really gave a lot of consideration to the victim impact statements, and he really did quite a good job of summarising them and describing their impact. Justice Beale asked us to turn to the impact of these crimes that travels far beyond Erin Patterson's immediate family, into her extended family, and then into the Leongatha and Currumbara communities more generally.
Associate Professor in Criminology and Justice at RMIT University, Brianna Chesser, thank you for joining us this morning.
You're welcome.
And here is the moment Justice Beale handed down the sentence. And apologies, we will get that to you now. Our apologies for that. We are just having a few technical issues trying to turn that around so quickly for you. But we're going to go back to our reporter, Alexandra Alvaro, who is outside the Supreme Court. And Alexandra, you are joined by Sasha Payne there, and Sasha was inside the court.
She was. So Sasha has been also covering this trial extensively alongside me, and she was our eyes and ears inside the court today. So I might start off by asking you, Sasha, how it all unfolded.
An absolutely huge day, Alex, of course. This has been more than 2.5, or nearly 2.5 years coming. And there were many people. It was packed in the court, the media and members of the public, and of course members of the families, the Ian Wilkinson himself, the Patterson families, and many others. There were, in fact, people that had been at the trial in Morwell, members of the public that had come to Melbourne today to watch this sentence. It was extremely tense. It was very quiet. It was everyone was very attentive and listening to every single word of what Justice Beale had to say today.
Okay, and tell me about Erin. She was sitting inside the court, possibly flanked by a couple of prison officers. What was her reaction while Justice Beale was handing down his sentence, and of course when he told Erin that she'd be in prison for life?
Well, as you know, we both covered the trial in Morwell, and she shows very little emotion most of the time. There were very few times during the trial that she showed any emotion, and today she showed absolutely none. She looked at Beale, Justice Beale, while he was speaking about the factors that led to his sentence. She was very attentive to everything he had to say, but at moments she closed her eyes and kept them closed for a while. She did nod at one point, and this was when Justice Beale specifically said, "Your lunch guests were undoubtedly belong to that company of people who always do good." And she actually nodded as though she was agreeing with him then. But other than that, hands in her lap, very little response. When the sentence was read out and she was taken from the dock, she looked straight ahead. She didn't look at any members of the media, members of the public. She seemed to steady herself as she was walking out on the walls. But other than that, we saw very little emotional response from her.
And usually with Erin Patterson, we see her have this habit of blinking quite rapidly and looking ahead. Was that true today as well?
Not as much as she had during some of the moments during the trial, particularly when she was giving her evidence. As I say, she closed her eyes for a lot of it when Beale was speaking. She looked straight ahead. She didn't look at anyone else, and was very composed and showed very little emotion.
Surprising even, given that Justice Beale made mention of her children and the fact that she, through her conduct, has robbed her children of their grandparents. Was there any reaction during that part? I mean, during the trial we saw Erin Patterson break down into tears when her children were mentioned. Was there any of that today?
No, there wasn't. And yes, as you say, it was. We heard some heartbreaking testimony, and even during the victim impact statements 2 weeks ago, Simon Patterson's victim impact statement talking about the children and the relationship they'd lost with their mother because she was going to be in prison for a very long time, and the fact that she had brought them on them pained him deeply. But she showed no response at all. There were times during the trial when she cried when her children were mentioned or when she saw a video of them, but nothing today.
And we also saw that Ian Wilkinson was obviously inside the courtroom. Were there any other family members that you saw, members of the Wilkinson and Patterson families, or was it just Ian? We saw Ruth Dubois as well.
Ruth Dubois and Brad Dubois were there. Brad Dubois was sitting next to Ian Wilkinson in the court. A number of other family members who were here during the victim impact statements 2 weeks ago. Ian was on the left of the dock, left of Erin. Similarly, he didn't look at Erin once. He looked straight ahead at Justice Beale, listening very attentively to his remarks during the entire sentencing. And as we've seen during the trial and elsewhere, incredibly stoic, gracious man. This is a man who has sat through the most harrowing details about his own severe illness, the death of his beloved wife, and deaths of 2 other people he cared for deeply. He's listened to all of that. He's been respectful, he's been gracious, he is absolutely a picture of dignity, and he was that today as well.
Yeah, which is something that sticks out to me during the whole trial, just seeing his resilience, which is something that his daughter spoke about even through his victim impact statement. The resilience of Ian Wilkinson is definitely something we've seen throughout this trial. But tell me, what stuck out to you while you were listening to Justice Beale's sentencing? What stuck out to you?
It was probably a lot of what you could have expected after hearing from the prosecution and defence during the victim impact statements. He did balance that the conditions that Erin is going to be living in for a very, very long time. In fact, most of her life, if not all of her life. He did balance that and take that into account when he did impose that non-parole period, a parole of at 33 years. So that was probably something that obviously the issue of parole was the big issue that everyone was waiting to see. There was absolutely no doubt that she was going to get a very, very long sentence and, of course, life. He said that he had no hesitation in finding that she fell into the worst category. That is a serious and violent offender. So he certainly didn't pull any punches when he talked about exactly how serious this crime or these crimes have been and the impact on 4 generations of families that he clearly was very moved by in watching them during the trial, in listening to those statements, and in just seeing that this is a very tight, loving family that has been utterly destroyed by this behaviour, and he certainly took that very much into account and was not did not resile at all from giving her the longest possible sentence he could.
And you were also in court when those victim impact statements were being read out. How did the mood in court today differ from that day?
I think the victim impact statements in that pre-sentence hearing 2 weeks ago was probably one of the most powerful, moving and emotional parts of the entire trial, to be honest. I mean, we sat through 10 weeks of evidence, as did the jury, as did families, as did the judge, the lawyers, of course. So we've heard a lot of detail to this point about exactly what happened at the lunch, what happened after the lunch, the impact on people. But hearing those victim impact statements last week, particularly Ian, was so moving. It was he described feeling half alive since he lost his wife, and it was very difficult to not feel incredibly sad hearing that. I think today was more not closure, because I don't think anyone ever gets that, but it was the finality of this part of the process, that we've been through the trial, she's been found guilty, she's now been sentenced. So I think people were just more interested in hearing what was going to be said today, what is the outcome, and what happens from here.
Well, thank you so much, Sasha, for joining me. You've done a fantastic job covering this trial, so thanks so much for having a chat to us.
You're welcome.
Thank you. So there you go, Gemma. That was Sasha Payne. She was just chatting about Justice Beale's remarks and what he had to say as he was handing down his sentence.
Alexander Alvaro there outside the Supreme Court. Thank you to you and Sasha Payne. And here is the moment that Justice Beale handed down the sentence.
You showed no pity for your victims. Instead of informing those treating the Pattersons and Wilkinsons that you had used foraged mushrooms, which you could have done without having to admit that you had deliberately poisoned their meals, you repeatedly denied foraging insisting that the mushrooms for the beef Wellingtons were sourced solely from Woolworths and an Asian grocery. Erin was embraced as part of the Patterson family. She was welcomed and treated with genuine love and respect in a way she did not appear to experience from her own family. Her actions represent a profound and devastating betrayal of the trust and love extended to her. Having regard to the aggravating circumstances of your offending and the victim impact statements, I have no hesitation in finding that your offending falls into the worst category for the offences of murder and attempted murder. As the case law makes clear, the fact that it is possible to imagine even worse instances of such offences does not refute that categorisation. The gravity of your offending warrants the imposition of the maximum penalties for your crimes. Fixing a non-parole period is not to undervalue the horrendous nature of your offending. Your total effective sentence will be life imprisonment, and the period during which you will be ineligible for parole will be a very substantial one. Please stand. For the attempted murder of Ian Wilkinson, I sentence you to 25 years imprisonment. For the murder of Heather Wilkinson, I sentence you to life imprisonment. For the murder of Gail Patterson, I sentence you to life imprisonment. For the murder of Don Patterson, I sentence you to life imprisonment. All sentences are to be served concurrently. The total effective sentence is life imprisonment, and I fix a non-parole period of 33 years.
Okay, we'll go back now to our reporter Alexandra Alvaro, who is outside the Supreme Court in Victoria. Alex, you have a guest there for us. Can you tell us what was key for you in those sentencing remarks?
Yeah, I am. I'm joined by Christian Silva. He is Victoria's court reporter here at the ABC and also the host of Mushroom Case Daily. I might ask Christian that question, actually. Christian, we just heard from Justice Beale his reasons for that imposition of a life sentence for Erin Patterson with a non-parole period of 33 years. Tell me what stuck out to you.
Well, I mean, the life sentence is not something that's handed out for every murder in Victoria. In some states that is a mandatory thing, but it's not here. So it's quite exceptional when it does happen in Victoria, and that really reflected the gravity of this crime. I mean, you've got a triple murder as well as an attempted murder. So incredibly serious offending. And he made that plain in his remarks, talking about how this was a premeditated killing. He said that Patterson had spent at least weeks planning to do this and carried it out with really devastating effect, watching on as her victims ate this poisonous meal and did nothing to intervene in the aftermath. In terms of the sentence's bottom end, the non-parole period of 33 years, Justice Beale noted that Patterson's conditions in prison were different to most other prisoners. She spends about 22 hours a day in a cell, and that's for her own protection. She has very little access to things like the exercise yard, for instance, or even other prisoners. And Justice Beale noted that Patterson's notoriety is something that will really add extra weight to that sentence, and that's part of the reason why she was given that option of a parole date in the future, but you're talking 2056 at the earliest.
And not even guaranteed. She would have to apply for that parole and convince a parole board that she's able to be released into the community.
Absolutely no guarantees that Patterson would be released at all.
Okay. And just quickly, I think we've got 30 seconds left, but what was your assessment of the mood in the courtroom?
It was pretty tense in there, Alex. When that sentence came to be delivered, you could have heard a pin drop in there. It was total silence.
Yeah. So as you just heard there, Erin Patterson has been sentenced to life in prison with a non-parole period of 33 years, and that was Christian Silva, host of Mushroom Case Daily, talking about his reaction to what just happened.
Alexandra Alvaro, thank you. And just repeating that breaking news from this hour, Erin Patterson will spend at least 33 years behind bars for murdering 3 relatives and trying to kill a 4th with beef Wellingtons laced with death cap mushrooms. The Victorian Supreme Court Justice Christopher Beale imposed a life sentence for the 2023 murders. I'm Gemma Vaness. ABC viewers are leaving us now. You can continue watching on the ABC News channel.
We are off to see something that's not happened in decades.
Doctors are blowing the whistle on what went wrong.
This was probably not a great deal and there is no plan B here.
Is it possible a human has already been infected?
Yeah, it might.
Why are members saying that you're trying to grab the money?
Because it's a smear campaign.
Get behind the car, behind the car.
Right now, it's hard to believe in the American dream.
I work for a better Australia for all of us.
7:30 tonight, ABC TV and ABC iView. A mysterious death.
How is anyone drowning in this creek?
My gut feeling is it was poor policing.
I mean, this is a joke. The final hours of Louisa Ioannidis.
She actually left to go to the airport on that very day that she was last seen.
I just hear her screaming, "Please stop."
Compelling new evidence.
That finding was surprising.
And an expert opinion.
The evidence for her having drowned is slight.
Australian Story.
Her story has to be brought out.
Tonight on ABC.
They're worth a lot of money. I've seen estimates that say $20 trillion.
The race to the bottom.
What's down there does not belong to one company or one country. It belongs to all of humankind.
President Trump is doing something about it.
The global impact of deep-sea mining.
We don't know how to protect it. The impacts will be severe and permanent.
It's possible we will cause the extinction of something that we know nothing about.
So you're not a ruthless corporate mercenary then?
Oh, hell no.
I think it's just plain old greed, right?
Four Corners, tonight, ABC and ABC iView.
The assembly is back.
There are even more students.
And we're coming in from all around the country.
From New South Wales.
Western Australia.
A little bit more enthusiasm.
Well, Canberra.
We'll be interviewing some of Australia's most famous faces
to unmask the real person behind the public persona.
Bold questions.
You one worst male fake accent.
Brave answers.
I'm about to cry.
Can I go back to you?
The new series.
This is a gift.
The Assembly starts September 21 on ABC and ABC iView.
You're with ABC News. It is 11 a.m. Eastern and 9 a.m. in the West. Leading our bulletin this hour, convicted triple murderer Erin Patterson has been sentenced to life in prison with a non-parole period of at least 33 years. Patterson's in-laws, Don and Gail, and Gail's sister Heather Wilkinson were killed after being served a beef Wellington lunch containing death cap mushrooms. Also ahead, the US president ready to impose new sanctions on Russia after its biggest aerial attack on Ukraine. A Donald Trump executive order to prioritise the exploitation of critical minerals on the seabed, labelled unlawful and illegal. Carlos Alcaraz wins his second US Open tennis title, defeating Jannik Sinner in 4 sets. And stargazers dazzled by a rare blood moon, with Australia treated to some of the best views in the world. It's Monday, the 8th of September. I'm Gemma Vaness, and this is ABC News Mornings. A judge has sentenced convicted triple murderer Erin Patterson to life imprisonment with a non-parole period of 33 years, marking the conclusion of the mushroom murder case that has gripped the world. In July, a jury found Erin Patterson guilty of the murders of 3 of her lunch guests and the attempted murder of a 4th after she served them a meal containing death cap mushrooms at her home in Leongatha in Victoria's South Gippsland region. That was on July 29th, 2023. The victims were all directly related to Patterson's estranged husband, Simon Patterson. His parents, Gail and Don, both died, along with Gail's sister, Heather Wilkinson. Heather's husband, Ian Wilkinson, survived after weeks of treatment in hospital. Patterson pleaded not guilty and always maintained the deadly lunch was a tragic accident. More than 50 witnesses gave evidence during the marathon 2-month trial at the Latrobe Valley Law Courts in Morwell. The jury was shown video of Patterson visiting hospital after the lunch. Doctors told the court she showed no signs of death cap mushroom poisoning. Jurors were also shown security vision of her dumping a food dehydrator at a local transfer station and photos of the individual beef Wellington servings. The The prosecution presented messages it said demonstrated the deterioration in the relationship between Patterson and her in-laws. Well, after 6.5 days of deliberations, the jury found Patterson guilty on all 4 charges. Last month, police released Patterson's police interview, recorded a week after the deadly lunch.
Obviously, we've got concerns in relation to these mushrooms and where they've come from. Okay. Is that something you've done in the past, foraging for the mushrooms or anything like that? Never. Right. Do you preserve foods or anything like that? No. Have you ever dehydrated food or anything like that? Okay.
2 weeks ago, Patterson appeared in the Supreme Court in Melbourne, where the 50-year-old heard from the people affected by her offending through victim impact statements. Ian Wilkinson spoke of his enduring grief of losing his wife of 44 years. While a statement from Simon Patterson was read to the court, revealing the devastating impact on the couple's 2 children. Today's sentencing was live streamed. Justice Christopher Beale summarised the aggravating circumstances of Patterson's offending.
Your offending, which resulted in the death of 3 people and near death of another, involved substantial premeditation. I am satisfied that by the 16th of July 23, when you unusually invited Simon, his parents and his aunt and uncle to a lunch without the children to discuss your non-existent medical issues, you did so with the intention of killing them all. Having regard to the aggravating circumstances of your offending and the victim impact statements, I have no hesitation in finding that your offending falls into the worst category for the offences of murder and attempted murder. As the case law makes clear, the fact that it is possible to imagine even worse instances of such offences does not refute that categorisation. The gravity of your offending warrants the imposition of the maximum penalties for your crimes. The total effective sentence is life imprisonment, and I fix a non-parole period of 33 years.
Outside court, survivor Ian Wilkinson praised police and the health workers who treated him.
They brought to light the truth of what happened with the death of 3 good people. We're grateful for their skills that brought this truth to light. And I'm also very grateful for the kindness and compassion they showed us, me and my family, throughout the long process that has brought us to this day.
Going back now to our reporter Alexandra Alvaro, who's outside the Supreme Court and who is joined by Mushroom Daily host Christian Silva. I know you both covered this case extensively. What was key for you in today's sentencing?
Well, certainly for me, Justice Beale really went through those aggravating factors that he considered when he was, talking about Erin Patterson's offending, the fact that it was meticulously planned, the harm that it has caused on 4 generations of families. But Christian, I'm sure you've got your own ideas. I really want to know from you what the reaction was from Erin when you were inside the courtroom. We know that she usually doesn't display much emotion. Was it the same today?
It was largely the same. Patterson was brought into the court dock at the start of the hearing, and I mean, for most of it, she cut a pretty glum figure in the court dock. But as Justice Beale started going through his sentence and just talking about how, blatant this crime was, Patterson shut her eyes and just appeared to be trying to sort of block it out as he was going through, step after step of this.
It was a timeline, wasn't it, that he really went through?
And it was a damning timeline when he put it in that context and summarised it in that way. At times, Patterson appeared to be getting a little bit emotional, but she didn't sort of shed any tears. There weren't any great waterworks, despite the judge talking about the impact that this crime had on her family and the wider community. And when it came to that critical moment to be sentenced, Erin Patterson stood up and effectively just took it, copped it on the chin, didn't really show a great deal of emotion, and within a minute or two she was escorted out of the room.
And now is probably on her way back to Dame Phyllis Frost, although I haven't seen a prison van leave.
There's a bit of a crowd behind us, which you may be able to see there, waiting for the prison van to be driven out of the Supreme Court gates. And yes, that is where Erin Patterson will go, to a women's prison on the outskirts of Melbourne. It's where she's been largely for the last 2 years, but now it's going to be her home, possibly for the rest of her life.
And let's talk about who else was in the courtroom. We know that Pastor Ian Wilkinson was inside the courtroom. He spoke to the media a very short time ago. But there was a noted absence. Simon Patterson wasn't in court, Erin Patterson's estranged husband. Was that noted by you too?
Yeah, Simon Patterson wasn't seen a few weeks ago during the pre-sentence hearing either. And that was a hearing where he had the opportunity to give a victim impact statement, and instead of delivering it in person, he chose to submit a written statement which was read out on his behalf. He wasn't here today. Simon Patterson is obviously a very notable person in this case. He was the fifth person who was invited to the lunch, and as many people know, he declined. And the backstory to that has come out since the trial, that he felt that Erin Patterson had previously poisoned him and had led him to fall very, very sick. And so he pulled out of the lunch because he felt too uncomfortable. Simon Patterson did testify at the trial, but since then he hasn't been seen, willingly anyway, in public.
Should also note that those allegations that the prosecution were hoping to put forward were never tested in front of a jury, and it's not what Erin Patterson has been sentenced for today. And Erin Patterson was set to deny those allegations if they were to come to court. But tell me, what was the mood inside the courtroom?
Oh, it was a very tense atmosphere. I mean, that was towards the end. Usually in these cases, when people are milling into the room before the hearing, it's actually a bit lighter than you would think. There's a lot of people who followed this case for a long time, many people who sat in the same room at the Morwell trial for 10 weeks next to each other. So there's usually actually a bit of friendly chatter before the hearing starts, but once the judge comes on the bench, it's pretty tense. And as I said, you would have heard a pin drop through that entire sentence. Everyone was hanging off every word that Justice Beale had to say. And then at the end, it was a pretty abrupt ending to it all. Maybe there was an element of people being somewhat shell-shocked by the sharp ending, but people filtered out of the room pretty quickly. No doubt in private, there'll be a lot of emotion on all sides of this case. The prosecution, the police, the Patterson and Wilkinson families, and of course at Erin Patterson's end as well.
Yeah, and obviously the inevitable next question is what happens next. This is probably not the end, or maybe it is, but we haven't heard anything from Erin Patterson's defence team today, or whether there might be an appeal on foot.
We haven't, and they have about 28 days to formally lodge that appeal. But look, the courts are pretty generous, and if they miss the appeal date by a few days, that will be okay. But what the legal team will have to do if they want to appeal is they're going to have to give the Court of Appeal some pretty decent grounds to lodge this legal challenge on. You can't just say, oh, the jury got it wrong, unless there's pretty compelling evidence that the jury was, given incorrect information or not
that there wasn't enough evidence maybe to convict her on.
Correct, or that the judge in some way made a mistake with the way he instructed the jury, or they could potentially go right back to the start, to before this trial even began. Maybe they could look at some of the material that was excluded from the trial and perhaps point that it would have been to Patterson's benefit, or perhaps they would have looked at some of the evidence that was included in the trial and said maybe this shouldn't have gone in. But look, it's very tough to say what those potential appeal grounds could be. And then once they've lodged the paperwork, the Court of Appeal has to decide whether they'll even consider it.
Right.
If they pass that hurdle, then the Court of Appeal would hear an appeal, and if they are successful on that front, a retrial could be ordered. So there's so many steps.
And a retrial in this case, how likely would you think that is, given the huge amount of attention this case has had? What do you think?
Well, I mean, a potential retrial would be determined on the legal grounds. Justice Beale made a comment a few weeks ago saying that he thought it was unlikely that an appeal would be allowed. And I guess that probably highlights the fact that he thought he ran his trial well. But as for a potential retrial in the unlikely event that it happens, under Victorian, the way it's sort of run here in Victoria, it would be put before another jury. You'd imagine there'd have to be a significant amount of time that would have to pass, given all the attention on the case. But as the judge said, he believes it's unlikely that that would ever happen.
And just lastly, because I know you've probably got to run off and record a pod, but I wanted to ask your reflections on this case. You're an experienced court reporter. You've covered many cases. Your reflections on the scale of this case.
I think in terms of public attention on it, it's one of the biggest cases in the last 50 years. I've spoken to many experienced lawyers and reporters with decades more time under their belt than I've had, and they say this is the biggest thing that they've seen since the Lindy Chamberlain case in terms of the public attention. So it could be decades until we see a case with this much attention on it. I think there will be many people that will question whether that attention was warranted, and I think that's a discussion that is worth having. And perhaps it's an uncomfortable discussion as well for members of the media, including us, who have inevitably fuelled what has been a frenzied interest in this case since the deaths of those lunch guests 2 years ago.
Certainly. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Christian. You've done an amazing job covering this case. So there you go, Gemma. That was Christian Silver, host of Mushroom Case Daily.
Yeah, thank you too to you, Alex, for your extensive coverage leading up to today and during this sentencing today. Thank you.